Hello and welcome to the Business of Authority. I'm Jonathan Stark.
And I'm Michelle Moulton.
And today we're going to talk about BizDev systems for soloists. Ready, go.
Yes. Yes. This was so funny to me because we had both said, we'll query our respective communities and see what people have to say. And I didn't realize how different our client bases are. It's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not a conversation that I ever hear. Nobody, as far as, I'm sure there's some exceptions that just don't mention it, but nobody in my universe really does biz dev. But maybe we should start with a definition so that people even know what we're talking about.
Yeah. So, shall I just dive in?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
So I think of business development as a very one-to-one kind of process. So for example, let's say you're doing a podcast as part of your outreach. I think of that as marketing. Mm-hmm. I don't think of podcasting as business development, although you might have business development conversations with the people, kind of behind the screen or in the green room. So business development is that one-to-one outreach where basically what you're doing is trying to add to continually warm up your contacts so that eventually the right ones become buyers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the closest thing that usually gets discussed in this that you could even squint at and kind of say is biz dev in my side of the fence, or on my side of the fence, would be what you described, where people are inviting guests on their shows who would make good clients, or at least presumably would. And sort of potentially using that as a foot in the door to kind of have a biz devish kind of conversation, short conversation off mic. The other thing is, and this again, you got to squint to really consider it biz dev, is taking leads that are warm, but maybe they're not in an urgent need situation. They're not ready to buy right now. And saying, hey, would it be okay? Best way to keep in touch. We should keep in touch. Yes. Best way would be if, could I just add your email address to my mailing list? And that way you'll just automatically get updates from me and you can reply to any message that goes right to me. And they usually say yes to that. So that is the closest. I'm trying to think, was there one other one? The only other things are I wouldn't call systems. There's more like desperation, spammy freelance, like, oh my God, I don't have enough money coming in this month. I'm going to send an email to all my past clients and say, hey, I've got an opening in my calendars or anything. Yeah. It works sometimes. You don't want to be in a situation to need to do that.
Yeah, that's the thing. It can work. Yeah, it's not a system, and it does feel very freelancer-y to me. Like, oh, okay, I'm finishing project X. What's next? And sometimes people do that kind of at the beginning of their consulting career as they get off an assignment because they haven't developed a system yet. And the thing that I hate the most about that is the emotional toll it takes on the person.
Right.
Because you don't know where your next meal is coming from, so to speak. And that's hard. And it's hard for that not to reflect in that communication and even have a sense of desperation about it.
Right. Which scares them away, has a negative effect on your ability to set a good price. So it's definitely bad. Okay, but so that is the list of things that I see from my group of people. So, and I'm sure there are outliers that just don't talk about it or something, but generally speaking, those are the things that come up.
Well, and I guess I want to be clear here. I'm not saying that, having to do one-to-one business development is something that everyone should aspire to. It goes along with a very particular kind of expertise business. And you don't have to build your business that way, but it tends to result in businesses that are a whale-like model where, maybe 3 to 5 clients and you're making a lot from each one. So a lot of these businesses that use this in an ongoing way have exceedingly high revenue. And they're not at 100 or 200, they're at 5, 6, a million, even more.
And you're talking about solo businesses.
Yes.
So these are not the only time I've really been exposed to what I would consider like serious biz dev was when I was consulting with a firm that probably had 10 people when I joined and quickly grew to like 200. And there was a dedicated BizDev person,
Yeah.
and they were just like super attractive, super personable, and could talk to anybody. And you just wanted to like be around this guy, so it was, how's it different from sales? It feels like just farther up the funnel sales to me.
So let me explain it this way. Like the guy that you just described, he's what I might call a 90% person. And by that, I mean 90% of the people that he encounters are going to like him.
Yes.
Right. And that's part of what he does, and part of what he grooms in himself is that likability, and he's going to have a certain amount of knowledge, technical knowledge, but he doesn't have to be a technical person in order to get enough technical knowledge to sell and to be liked and to build relationships. With a soloist where you're doing business development, obviously you're not a salesperson, just a salesperson, right? Because you're delivering the goods. And that's both a positive and a negative. It's a positive because you are able to embody this thing that you will be, this service or this product or productized service that you will be delivering. So you have all that in you, and your buyer is interacting, and you're building a relationship with the person who's actually going to do the work. There's no, middle person. The negative part is exactly that.
Yeah.
There is no middle person, and you're not leveraging, right? So it tends to be, well, it can be a reasonable consumer of time beyond the time that you spend doing whatever content you create, like podcasts,
Right.
or a LinkedIn post, or your blogs and articles.
Right. Yeah. This was this dude's full-time job. And I hasten to point out that we did have also, or they had a full-time salesperson who was different. It was the first guy, the BizDev guy, was not a sales guy. I was sort of saying that earlier, almost facetiously. And then the sales guy was like a closer.
A closer.
And so the BizDev guy, he didn't just do outreach to people who would probably or potentially make good whale clients, but they were, everybody he was talking to was whale-ish. He would also reach out to people that would potentially good partners in terms of sending leads back and forth, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and, referral sources.
Right, or making relationships with, let's say, like a big media outlet which was more of a marketing-ish function or a PR function, but it was 100%. The thing about it that was consistent across all the different kinds of people he would reach out to and kind of bring to the table was 100% relationships. He was just building relationships with. It was probably, at least I was only exposed to sort of 3 different types of people, 3 different types of other companies, and it was like creating relationships for, I would guess, just sort of so that the other people could refer us. We were top of mind. Maybe they would hire us, that sort of thing. So, but then they, like when there was a deal on the table, they brought in Tim, and Tim closed it. He brought it to a close one way or another very quickly.
Yeah.
Whether lost or won.
There's a lot of different ways in professional service firms to build a sales and marketing function. The organization that I kind of grew up in, we couldn't even use the word sales. Marketing meant sales. And so we had a few corporate true marketing people who did the stuff, right? The website and all of that stuff. But the sales were done by, if not the people doing the work, the people who used to do that kind of work, right? So the partners would do most, but not all of the selling. There was another firm that we competed with all the time that actually had salespeople. And we used to scoff at that. We're like, oh, yes, they have salespeople, whereas we have people who are actually doing the work. Well, both firms were equally successful in different ways with a different model. And so those kinds of models inside a firm really impact how people think about what I'm going to sell and who I'm going to sell to. So when you're a soloist, it's like there's not a lot of options, right? You either figure out how to sell, where if you need to sell one-to-one, you figure out how to do that. Even if you don't need to sell one-to-one, I'm going to argue you still need to build relationships in business, because that's where business comes from. And you don't know what interesting and helpful people you will meet through your relationships until you start to pay attention to them.
Yeah, that's 100% true. It's like shocking what's out there when you start to like poke around.
Well, and let me just add this other thing though. I also think there's this dream. I've heard this so many times that there is a perfect salesperson out there. And if I could just find them, I would never have to sell again. And I would pay them whatever it takes, because then they'd be bringing me so much business that I wouldn't even worry about it anymore. And I just want to say, for most of us, that is a fallacy, that until you figure out, even if you're not a soloist, until you figure out how to sell what you have, there is no one magic person who's going to be able to do it. You might be able to find someone who can help you strategize on how to do it, but you have to have that strategy first and know that it works. There isn't a magic bullet in the form of the perfect salesperson.
Yeah, I've been exposed to lots of situations where the salespeople are like, "We literally cannot sell this. We don't understand what this thing does. Like, you need to let us talk about it in a different way. You know, you can't." It's so anyway. I'm just piling on. Yes, I agree with that. But let's try and focus this down to practical soloist advice. Because so far I'm feeling like there's a reason why I haven't heard a lot of BizDev talk in a primarily soloist community, because it's too much work. It's the kind of thing you do want to outsource, but you can't really outsource it well unless you get to a certain point. Like, it's not the first thing you'd hire for. So what does it look like so you've got some people who are very successful soloists who do BizDev. So what does that look like?
Well, first of all, I don't want to say that it's like hugely time consuming, because it's not. Done well, business development for a soloist with an existing, profitable business. And we're not talking about somebody that's just starting and doesn't know where the next project comes from. It's a very small part of your week. But so let's talk about like where you start. Mm-hmm. So the beginning of any business development process is, who do we want to know? Mm-hmm. Who's our ideal client? Who's our ideal buyer? I would add to that, who might refer us, or what we used to call centers of influence. So like if you are, let's say you're a CPA, a center of influence might be estate attorneys. A center of influence might be financial planners or financial advisors, like the kinds of people and professions that might refer people to you, and vice versa. Right? Because that's the best, is when you can come up with centers of influence where it's mutual, where you help them and they can help you. Mm-hmm. The second thing, obviously, is you should have a really good idea of what it is that you're selling. Mm-hmm. And the kinds of language that you want to use around that. But I want to point out that these, for the most part, these are not selling conversations in the beginning. These are get to know you conversations. Let me understand what kinds of challenges you're facing. Let me have maybe, again, depending on the specialty, maybe we'll even have a brief brainstorm discussion on a thing that you're playing with. So it's really, understanding who you're serving and what their problems are, as well as how to translate your expertise to their world. And that's really simple. It's a very one-to-one kind of thing. And it's eased when you have a niche, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. So if you're just calling on, technology executives and financial service companies, that's narrow enough that you can become known to a group of people in there, not just from your podcast or your writings, but from people one-to-one having worked with you or encountered you.
Mm-hmm. So everyone's busy, Rochelle. Why would anyone pick up the phone or return my message to like, hey, let's grab coffee and talk about your big business problems, person I've never met before. So like, tactically speaking, what is the approach that folks use at the hardest part of this, which is the very beginning of the relationship? Like, what is the initial contact, I guess? Like, what does it look like in different situations?
Let me answer that in two ways. One is there are people you already know. Even if you've just started your business, there are people from where you worked before that you know. So start with them because that's an easy lift. It's somebody you know, and you can start to like practice and get more comfortable with them. Most of the people that I've worked with get those initial contacts in one of two ways. Either it's something on LinkedIn, because that's so target rich when you think about corporate people or people who are buying B2B services. And the other is that they've been referred by somebody. So maybe it's a former client. They said, oh, you should talk to so-and-so. Or it was a podcast guest somewhere. And they said, oh, the host of the XYZ show said, I must talk with you. Mm-hmm. So those are the kinds of openings. And you can force some of those inside of LinkedIn. And by force them, I mean you can decide that you're going to go and connect with 50 people in your space over the course of the next, month or two. And when I say connect, I mean literally just like you're connecting in LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And then you provide value to them, because that's the core about this. I think there's this feeling that somehow business development is about beating people over the head until they buy from you. Mm-hmm. And really what it's about is getting to know them and understanding what their stuff is and being a resource. It can be very relaxed. And I think that the more comfortable that one can get with this idea that, yes, we're selling, but we're doing it for the benefit of the other party, mm-hmm. the easier it gets, because then you'll explain to somebody who's a bad fit that you're really not the right person to help them with. But you know what? I know so-and-so who is really smart about this. Let me connect you with them and mm-hmm. see if that might make sense. You're being helpful.
Right. So, but they know this is a thinly veiled attempt to get my money, Rochelle. And it is true. There's a massive amount of poorly executed examples of this on LinkedIn in particular.
Yes.
And I actually just went through this exercise. I do, as I think I mentioned up front, the LinkedIn outreach thing, it does work for some people if you do it well and mm-hmm. differentiate yourself from the flood of spammers who are like, here are 3 paragraphs and 17 links about my company. Thoughts? And just like complete, or like recruiters that are like, it says right in my profile, not looking for work, but okay. So there's just a lot of that noise in the DMs on LinkedIn, but there are ways to do it. And I was working with someone recently who just went through a phase of this, kind of listening tourish. It really wasn't something to sell. It was more like we were looking for language that they would use to describe what keeps them up nights. It was as simple as that. And still, people are like, it's two things of it that I think might surprise people who haven't tried it. First of all, a shocking number of people were willing to help. So the question was, hey,
yes.
It was basically like, I noticed that you're an expert at thing that target market is an expert at. Could I ask you a quick question about that? And massive number of yeses. Just, I don't know the percentage, but just mm-hmm. dozens and dozens and dozens of yeses. And lots of like, well, I don't really consider myself an expert, but go ahead. And just people really generous with their time, which will shock anybody who curses under their breath while they're deleting their LinkedIn DMs. So, well, yeah. So, and then the other, yeah. And then but then you can feel them, because I like read through these threads. I can feel them waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, wait a second, why is this person asking me these questions? And then there's a certain point where where my guy needs to say, well, I have a podcast that's in this space and I'm just trying to keep current because I'm not actually in this, I'm in this space, but in a different way. And I just, want to keep current with what's up to date. And I don't trust the headlines. I wanted to get inside information from people like you and so forth. But there's this moment where they become, even like the most generous people, they become wary about what does this person want? They start thinking, what does this person want? And this wasn't the exercise, but that would be a perfect time. Hey, Reggie. But that would be a perfect time to, once this is uncovered, if you did have expertise in the space, my guy doesn't, but if you did have expertise in the space, to say like, have you thought about this, or have you seen this post, or whatever, like do something helpful right there. It starts off with you asking for a favor, basically. Could I ask you a question? Yes, here's the question. Here's a great answer. And then like, if they expose something about their struggle or challenge or whatever, and you are an expert in that space, then you could suggest something that is not buy my thing, but have you read this or whatever. So super tactical, zoomed in approach that I could imagine working for the opening, which I think is the hardest part. It seems to me that is the toughest part.
Yeah, I think it's like anything, right? It's getting started. And the other thing I've seen really successfully, and I've done it myself, is where you do a campaign on LinkedIn, not an ad campaign, but you you upgrade to their Sales Navigator and you do a search on whatever parameters are of interest to you. And then you start reaching out and connecting with those people. And when I've done that, I've done it very low key. Like all I want from them is to connect. I'm not trying to sell them anything. I'm not trying to pick their brain and nothing. I just figure that if they're in there and I start to post some interesting things in LinkedIn that are engaging, that they will engage. Mm-hmm. And that's how they'll get to know me and know that I'm safe, mm-hmm. right? That it's okay. She's all right. Okay. Well, I get what she's about. And what's interesting is the reverse works as well, because then I'm seeing they're showing up in my feed and I'm seeing what they're writing about. And the people who are there a lot or who comment on the posts of other people that I know and respect, I start to feel like I know them. I see their little picture. If I read enough of their comments, I'll get to know them. And you'll find that there are certain people in your network who seem to be kind of the connectors, mm-hmm. where they're writing probably more stuff than you ever would. And they're engaging, they're interacting, and you can participate in their stuff. And you get some reflected glory, if you will, because you're just doing your thing. So I'm not even remotely suggesting that one has to be like a LinkedIn ninja to be able to do this. But it is a really good starting point to kind of warm people up. And there's another part of this too, though, which is, I think makes it easier, which is that you assign priorities. Right. So if you're keeping data on this, and we can talk about, different ways to do that. But if you are, I love having, A, B, and C, or 1, 2, and 3, like 3 categories of priority, so that you can always keep the most important people to you front and center. Mm-hmm. And you've got a way, whether it's systematized or just in an Excel spreadsheet somewhere or a Google sheet, you've got a way to instantly remind yourself of who they are, what they care about, and hopefully, your next action with that person.
Mm. Yeah. Super good, tactical, specific advice. I want to jump back to the LinkedIn thing because I want to emphasize something that you said that I think is total genius. And I've seen work for other people, which is the engaging with the other person's content. So mm-hmm. yes, you connect with a bunch of people. Maybe they'll see your stuff, your smart stuff that you post. To me, that's just marketing. That's content marketing, not BizDev. But then if you're strategically deciding through this list of people that you said, the last point you made, maybe there's 20 people on that list. Maybe there's only 10. And you set up alerts so that anytime they post something, you get notified of it. And whether it's LinkedIn or somewhere else, maybe they're active on Reddit or Twitter or somewhere else, but you're aware of it, and you can. What does someone want when they publish something on social media? They want engagement. They want it desperately. They want it so bad. That's all they want. They want likes. They want comments. They wouldn't be posting there if that wasn't what they wanted. They want to know that they're not shouting into the void. So if I'm not saying be disingenuous, but if they're smart and they're someone that you want to be engaged with, someone that you want to have a relationship with, it's probably completely genuine, that you'd be like, oh my God, this is genius. I never thought of this. What an insight. Maybe if you have a podcast, I'd love to have you on the show to drill into this point. Maybe if you have, or if you're just, maybe you don't have a podcast, but you're like, you know what, I want to do a whole article on this. Could I interview you for the article? Are there 3 other people that you think would be good to interview? Really engage with their stuff. And what are you doing? You're providing value first. Because that's the trick. It's like, how do you lead with value to a total stranger without setting off their stranger danger alert or their spam alert? It's not easy these days. I suppose it never was, but it's hard.
In some ways, it's easier today because at least you can get to these people. Like when there was like a secretary and a big office between you, that's tougher. But I think, the group that probably has the most challenges with this are those who are trying to hit Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 or even Fortune 50 executives in a space. Like you want the C-suite of those organizations. Those people are still really protected. A lot of them are not on social media very much. And that's why your relationships with the people around them are so critical. And again, usually when somebody comes out of a corporate role, they know some of these people already. So it helps that you've known them in real life. Right. And then you kind of use social media to maintain a connection. It's definitely easier than sparking one. But it's so much easier than people who are maybe a little shy or a little skeptical, because most of us are looking for we're looking for wisdom. We're looking for ideas. We're looking for help if we have a big challenge. I once had somebody to say to me, okay, this is what I want to do. And he described this big thing. He goes, but I don't know how to get there. He goes, I know you do. You need to show me how to do this. And I was like, oh, yes. That was a great day. Right. That's what you want for your clients. And so part of this is you're doing all the things we talked about, which is you're emailing on a regular basis. You have a list. Maybe you have a podcast if that's your thing. You're doing all of those things, and then in addition, you're doing this little bit. And the reason I keep saying little bit is this is not a big mountain to climb. This is, you start very, very small. You look at who's already in your universe that might be good future clients. And again, you're targeting. So you're not, looking at the guy who's baking your bread down the street if that's not your target. You're very, very focused. And the more focused you are, the easier this is, because everybody within that niche, not everybody, but key people know each other.
Yeah, they're usually very small.
Yeah. And once you've worked with them or you've known them through some professional or even social capacity, they start to talk about you.
Right.
And they share information. And so it becomes a very organic, natural thing as long as you build it into your process so that you're not let's say you're the kind of person that works on a big project. So you maybe work with 1 to 3 or 4 or 5 clients for 6 to 8 months. You don't suddenly put your head up like a groundhog when you're done at the 8 months and go, oh, I wonder what we do now. You're doing a little bit, at least every week. You don't have to do it every day, but you're doing a little bit every week all the way up to there. So by the time you have availability, you've got some people who are ready for you.
Yeah, it's an activity that falls into the gardening category. So I want to loop back to something that you quickly touched on, and I'm curious, in the real world, like with examples from your side of the fence, how many people are doing this strictly remote, like digital, and how many are incorporating some kind of in-person trade shows, conferences, Davos, TED, something? How many are even if there's just attending or they're speaking, like how many include that? And how many are just much more strictly over email? I almost hesitate. Phone almost feels like in person to me.
Well, you have to have permission to call somebody now, right? You can't just pick up the phone and call them anymore.
Yeah, you have an appointment practically.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about it. I would say it's somewhere between 90 to 95% are incorporate some aspect of real life. Obviously not during the extended pandemic, but and a lot of that is conferences.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're specialized within an industry, you go where the people are, and that's where you either expand existing relationships and or you start new ones. Like I'm one of the few that I can think of, and I'm not my own client, that really doesn't do much, in person. There's not a specific yet conference for people in the expertise space. Well, that's not true. There's David Baker's MYOB, which is a very good conference for people that have creative firms.
Right.
But yeah, most are doing both. And some, when they're in a very target-rich physical environment, are doing more like coffees. So if you're in a small town in the middle of Iowa, you're probably not doing the coffee thing. But if you're in Silicon Valley, you probably are. And maybe you're having, a beer after work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a quick story from someone on my side of the fence. It's not a soloist. It's maybe, I think they're like an eight or maybe 10 person firm at this point. Dev shop, basically. And they do have a dedicated person I would call BizDev / salesperson, like person who's in charge of creating new client relationships. I'm not sure what their title is, but just tried all the things online, couldn't get any traction with a particular target market, extremely specific target market, and then night and day, the whole thing turned around when they started going to trade association events, just overnight, like multiple sales calls per week. So, it's moral of the story is it can depend very much on the industry. Like, are these people that only do business with people they've met in person? In this case, yes. And since that's got an inherent scarcity to it, in other words, their competitors aren't also at the, parking garage construction association of America event, then it's like, oh, we're the only people here that do this kind of thing. And so like, there's a line of people that want to talk to them. Actually, I had a similar experience when I went to when mobile was really peaking, and basically everyone was like, oh man, we got to get on this bandwagon. I spoke at a thing called Murtec, which stood for MURTEC, which was it was kind of like a conference for CTOs in the chain restaurant space, like McDonald's and Panera and all that. I was the only person speaking that talked about, I think, anything digital at all, and definitely the only one that talked about mobile specifically. And this was after Starbucks had their mobile app, but before anybody else did. And the trade show floor was full of people trying to demonstrate these tablet-based POS systems, which now are ubiquitous, at least where I live. But this was in probably 2010, 2011. And it was like shooting fish in a barrel, basically. Like you go to the trade show and nobody wanted to really, there's, skeptical, like, what's this? What do you got? Sell me on this thing. Pitch me on this thing. Right. Meanwhile, I had 2 separate rooms full of CTOs of multi-million-dollar companies, like asking me questions about like, what about IoT? What about Bluetooth beacons or whatever was popular at the time? So
exactly, but see, think how powerful that is. Not from your end, but from theirs.
Right. Because
they've got a chance to ask you these questions, and they're going to remember you for that.
Yeah.
And the cost of that, there's a time cost and the physical cost of getting there, but that is so valuable, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about being in the authority space.
Right.
It's kind of like the equivalent of having a bunch of people who are exactly your ideal buyers begging you for answers to their most pressing questions.
Right, because you've anteed in, right? Because you also traveled and you did the thing, and you've put skin in the game. You've taken a risk, and you've been anointed by the conference organizers that you're not full of it. You know what you're talking about. So there's all kinds of things working in your favor. So I guess the takeaway would be, especially, and this is especially if you're trying to get to those people that have a lot of gatekeepers around them, that the in-person thing creates this I almost want to say artificial scarcity, but it creates a scarce environment where you're probably not in competition with hardly anyone, and in that moment. So it could be that the takeaway from this is to if you're, let's say you're deciding between 2 or 3 different target markets, and one of them is online like crazy, and the other one, your buyers are online like crazy, and the other one, one is online a lot, the other one isn't online a lot, then you could make a strategic decision to be like, well, I don't want to fight with all the other people who can sort of lazily in their jammies get access to these people. I want to, put on my dry clean clothes, fly to this place, and be the only one, be the only name in town, the only game in town. That could be, that's just a personal decision. Like which fight do you want to fight? And
well, there's also, things have changed in the last few years, because we had this collective turning ourselves into introverts in our jammies in our house, couple of years plus. And now I feel like there's such a hunger for in-person experiences. It's like we want to touch people again. And so there's some opportunities there. And I can argue sometimes the best use of a conference isn't to speak at all. Like usually that's where somebody starts, like, oh, I want to be the keynote speaker, or I want to speak at one of their breakout groups. I had a client where we came up with this very successful thing for them where all they did, there was one organization, and they picked 2 conferences a year, and they would go and they would pay for an exceptional speaker. And when I say speaker, I don't mean a platform speaker, but I mean a thinker speaker. And they would do a dinner.
Yep.
And they'd have, usually 10 to 12 spots, a big round table, and they would have this person who was a celebrity in their niche. And that person would be the focus. And so it was invitation only. You were not allowed to substitute, like you send your second in command note. So they did so much business out of that process. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things like this you can do, even as a soloist, when you are really focused and you know exactly who you want to reach and what might intrigue them.
Right. Yeah, I love that idea. Here's an even bigger one. I don't know if this might be out of the realm of reality for soloists, but I worked with a larger firm who created a trade association. So they were like, we want to create. It was kind of like a mastermind, really, but it wasn't. It was like what do they call it? Like a mobile innovation council or something like that. And they created it like a thing. Like if you heard of it, you wouldn't think like someone just made it up. But of course, every trade association and mastermind is just made up by somebody.
Yeah, at some point.
Right. But they took a leadership role. Like they said, you know what? There's not a thing that we could go to kind of like, there's no place where we could buy a trade show table. In other words, like the conference doesn't yet exist for the thing that we want to do. And they didn't want to, I suppose they could have started a conference, but they didn't want to do that, I guess. So they started like an invitation only, just like you said. We're reaching out to, we want one person from each one of these sectors: healthcare, infrastructure, space, just around the horn. And we want one person from each of these sort of non-competitive industries that don't compete with each other to meet, I think it was once a year, twice a year, something like that, in person, no substitutes. And it cost like, I don't know, they had to pay like $50,000 to be on the I can't remember what they called it. I feel like council. And it was, I know they did at least one that worked. And there's this hilarious FOMO, which is like, look, you're the leading company in aerospace. We want you, Bob Smith, CEO of this aerospace company, or CIO of this aerospace company. We want you. If you can't do it, we'll get Alice Jones from
your arch competitor,
from your arch nemesis. And we'll brainstorm in a room with, And it was like,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it was almost like holding them hostage. We better pay the 50 grand.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and you can do something similar as a soloist. I have a client who, and she pulled together a couple of other people to do it with her, but they started. Originally, it was a conference, and I think now it's extended to more of an organization, and it's around a particular title in certain kinds of companies. And she was able to do it very, very low cost because they started an organization and she got some people, a little bit like what you did, not quite the same, but because it's an organization that probably has at least 200 members now. But she partnered with a couple of deep pocketed Fortune 500 companies who put out the seed money, but she will always be known as one of the founders of that organization and always gets to speak.
right. It becomes like this super connector and like
Exactly.
famous locally. Here's another small scale DIY version of it that I've been exposed to, and also speaks to your comment earlier, which I believe is true, that people have kind of swung back to a thirst for in-person events, and the last thing I want to attend is another virtual summit. So a guy named Dan Oshinsky, who runs Inbox Collective, which is kind of like his superpower is email newsletters. And he's worked with some really big companies on their email newsletters, and he's partnered with a company that's more of a big-ish company to put on these, I can't think of the name of it, but there are these dinners in big cities in the U.S., perhaps abroad as well, but the ones I've seen are in the U.S., and he just reaches out to people on his mailing list who presumably he knows where they live, or maybe I answered a survey at one time about where I live. And he's like, hey, we're doing a dinner with a group of people who maintain daily email lists. It's going to be in Boston. It's free. It's this night. It's free, but there's only 20 people. So they're allowed because of the space, right? So this is natural, real, not fake scarcity. Are you in or out? And it's great. So I remember he did one, I think he's in New York, did one in Boston. I had a conflict, but I was dying to go, couldn't go. And now this year they're doing them, I think, in 6 or 7 cities in the US. So it's like, and like, think that's just not that hard. It's not that hard to organize. I mean, that's like organizing it's like a family reunion dinner, it's nothing.
Oh, it's easier.
Yeah, it is easier.
It's
right.
easier than that.
Yeah,
for
you
sure.
find a restaurant, you book a room that can seat 20 people. Yeah, the restaurant's happy to have the business. And yeah, it's just not that hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially if you're traveling. I have a client who, whenever he has to go to like New York, he makes a point of, okay, who do I know that's in New York? Goes through the list. And then, tries to get as many meetings as he can while he's there. I mean, I do the same thing when I get to New York. There's always somebody, everybody knows somebody in New York, right?
Right.
And so, yeah. And so I could argue that is a habit of people who are really good at business development, because you're not meeting with people you don't like. You're not meeting with people you don't resonate with. You're meeting with people who help you move your ideas forward, and that's energizing.
Yeah.
I mean, and I should be careful. An introvert might not find that energizing. They'll find the aftermath energizing, right?
Yep.
But even so, even if you're an introvert, it's great to be able to do a dinner or a lunch versus a 3-day conference. Much smaller lift if you're an introvert.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm like hiding in my hotel room. If I have to be at a conference for 3 days, I'm hiding for 2 of them. I can handle about 1 day of big crowds. I love seeing people in person. I just only handle about a day of it.
Well, it depends on, how it is too, right? Because you can have like some, small conversations, but if you know a lot of people and you're constantly being interrupted, that has a cognitive load too.
Right.
Right. It could be a small conference, but you know everybody,
right,
and it's harder to kind of get away.
Yep. Yeah. There are a lot of like awkward social interactions that like you're talking to someone and someone else is standing there dying to talk to you. And it's like, there's like this weird tension.
Yeah.
So, well, I think How are we doing on BizDev? I think we've given sort of like a wide-ranging tangent-laced discussion.
As usual.
As usual. But I feel like we've snuck in some very specific advice.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there's a little bit of something in here for just about everybody. I think that the way that I would kind of bring this to a close is that, what we haven't really said is, what's the system? I mean, we gave examples of this, but whatever your system is, you do want to track it. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean you have to go, buy Salesforce or Pipedrive. I mean, you can. Pipedrive is better than Salesforce for our kinds of businesses, I think. But you could just have a spreadsheet, but keep track someplace, and preferably someplace that you own. LinkedIn is not a good place to track this stuff because, if you get off their Sales Navigator, you lose all of the data. If LinkedIn decides they don't like you, you're at risk. So I would have, some place where you're keeping track of this, and then just build it into your week, whether that's you look at it at the beginning of the week, you look at it at the end of the week. I have one client who's pretty savvy, and he actually programmed this thing to send him certain kinds of alerts. Yeah. And so it just pings him whenever he's supposed to do something because he might not remember otherwise. Yeah. I mean, you work with the way that you work best, and you kind of make these systems bend to your will is how I think of it. But you definitely do want to track this stuff.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I liked just to wrap on the system piece, I like your idea of having a list of the people, being very, very clear to the point of having names of people, not just companies, names of people you want to create relationships with, having a recurring to-do or something that pings you to remember to reach out or do something, whatever your thing is, to do that thing on a regular basis. It's like gardening, not hunting. And then maybe if you want to get fancy, set up things like Google Alerts or alerts in different communities where these people are potentially going to be posting things, to be aware of what they're sharing, what they're interested in, just to get to know them, do your homework to get to know them, and then it'll make it just a lot easier for you to connect with them when you finally do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's systematizing it. And I think people can get lost in, what system should I buy? Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter. I mean, if you need to put it on a piece of paper, go do that. Mm-hmm. But just do it because you will forget.
Oh, yeah.
You think you won't, but you will. And remember, you have relationships with people, not with companies. So I don't ever want to see like the name of a company on somebody's list that doesn't have specific people earmarked, right? Unless it's, I need to figure out who I need to know here. And, then that's a temporary situation. Right. You're building relationships with individuals.
Great place to leave it. All right, folks, that's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark.
And I'm Rochelle Moulton.
And we hope you join us again next time for the Business of Authority. Bye.
Bye-bye.